You don't mind if we switch straight to English, given the fact that we have the esteemed honor of having an international expert with us today. The topic of today's discussion is about keeping the lights on. And I think the past year or so has been a reality check for most of us, or as some maybe more romantic of you might say, we are riding a steep learning curve, or actually too steep of a learning curve. So apart from the rhetoric about hydrogen, about expanding renewables, about how bad hydrocarbons are, about how quick or actually past oil peak we are, about how non-bankable oil and gas project is, we realized the past few months that the main pillar for keeping the lights on seems to be natural gas. And natural gas seems to be, and this seems to be the case not just now, but also for some decades to follow. Now, many of you might argue that natural gas has already been named as the bridge fuel for EU toward 2050. That's indeed so, and you would be absolutely right. However, at the same time, you had green taxonomy opposing any public investment in natural gas infrastructure or zero state support going into such projects. I think now we live in a different world, as also Yannis mentioned at his introductory remarks, and natural gas is back in the epicenter. And the international expert that we have with us today is pretty much in the epicenter of the global energy discussion as well. Of course, the elephant in the room is Russia, when here in Europe we're talking about natural gas. And Tatiana Mitrova is a prominent expert who is very well embedded in the same way that in our minds Russia and natural gas are pretty much embedded with one another. Tatiana is pretty much embedded, let's say, in two sides of the equation. On one side, she's had the honor of heading the Oil and Gas Energy Research Institute at the Russian Academy of Sciences. She has been heading the Energy Center of Moscow School of Management, and at the same time she's a research fellow at the Columbia Global Center of Energy Policy. She's also a board member of Schlumberger. She's also a board member of Novatec, a research fellow in Oxford Institute of Energy Studies, and I can keep on adding titles, but I will jump straight into the discussion in the interest of time. So I guess Tatiana, first of all, thank you very much for being with us. The very first question that comes to mind is, and I'm shifting the discussion towards Russia, help us understand a little bit how valuable or not is EU as a counterpart to Russia in terms of its energy diplomacy.
Thank you for a great question, and thank you for the invitation. It's really a great pleasure and honor for me to be today with you with such a distinguished audience. So to your question, in a normal world, I would answer, oh yes, Russia is actually more dependent on the European market than Europe is dependent on the Russian energy supplies. And that would have been true. But as Jake has actually described, the recent year has illustrated that in many cases there are suboptimal decisions, and sometimes there are irrational from the economic point of view decisions. And basically for Russia, something is happening that nobody could even think about. Voluntarily refusing from the European gas market, which is providing for approximately 5% of total Russian budget revenues, and which is really extremely important. It is consuming approximately 1/3 of total Russian gas output, so that's a lot. That is something unimaginable. But you see what is happening recently. It was the EU, the US, the UK, which have imposed sanctions on oil. There were no sanctions on gas at all, neither on pipeline gas or on the LNG. And it was Russia which initially in April has required switching to rubles, ruble payments, and that has already immediately resulted in certain customers refusing to do so, like Poland, Finland, Netherlands, Bulgaria. And then all summer it was an endless story of maintenance, turbines going to Canada, not getting back. So all these mysteries, what is happening with the turbines on Nord Stream. And finally on September 3rd, it was Russia which voluntarily has announced, it has actually self-sanctioned, saying we are not going to supply natural gas via Nord Stream unless the sanctions are lifted. And then the sabotage has happened, so now there is actually no route available. Finland pipeline is not working. Yamal-Europe pipeline through Poland, it is sanctioned by Russia. It is not working since May. Nord Stream stays idle because it is not available, though recently Russian Deputy Prime Minister has announced that one string is potentially available. We have to make checks, but probably it will be operational. Yet to be seen. Yeah. So we are basically left with Ukrainian transit. Surprisingly, despite the war, despite all the military attacks, actually, it is working at approximately half of the volumes which were, let's say, in 2021, but it is working. And it is supplying Central Europe and Hungary and Austria. So these are the main customers. And Turkstream. Yeah, one string goes to Turkey, another string is going to Italy.
So basically natural gas, if I hear you correctly, plays a way smaller, has a way smaller impact on Russia's GDP versus oil, which makes me actually ask the question, should we expect to see Russian gas returning back to Europe not in the short term, but even in the medium term? Because speaking to US LNG producers, for example, they live actually right now on I think they enjoy the idea that Russian gas is going to stay out of Europe for quite some time now. What's your view?
It will completely depend on the geopolitical situation and on the military actions in Ukraine. What will be, whether there is any ceasefire or any sort of settlement. I don't think that Russia would completely stop supplying Europe even this winter. So I still assume that some of the flows through Ukraine, though they might be physically damaged, but at least I think Russia would try to supply gas to the countries which are more or less supportive inside the EU. Serbia, Hungary, Austria, Italy, and the same with the Turkstream. It's not about increasing volumes because they are utilized, the Turkstream is utilized at full capacity, but those volumes which are now at approximately 20% of what Russia used to supply to the European Union, I think they will stay. But talking about the growth and getting back to the historical 140, 150 BCM, I think it's extremely questionable. So first of all, because of the physical damage for the Nord Stream, and God knows how long it will take to restore the pipes which are now actually being corroded by the seawater from inside. And then geopolitically, I mean, I can hardly imagine flows going through Poland now, both from the Russian side and from the Polish side. So something has to change dramatically. So therefore, and even if we assume that everything is settled down somehow, no idea how, but let's imagine, even then, I think that many European customers will now think twice before going into any sort of arrangement with Russia, because this fear that Russia will use gas weapon for blackmailing, it has realized in the full capacity.
Yeah, so it sounds to me that we need a replacement, and the replacement probably will be LNG. So my question is, and I would like to hear your view, is relying more on LNG actually putting our eggs in more baskets or just switching the basket?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't completely refuse from the pipeline gas, because there is pipeline gas going from Central Asia, from Azerbaijan, and it is, well, it's not solving all the problems, but there are some volumes. There are volumes coming from North Africa, from Algeria, volumes going from Norway. Yeah, so this pipeline gas is definitely extremely important. It is providing like a base load. Yeah, LNG, I mean, it means that Europe will have to pay premium compared to the Asian consumers. So historically, GKM index, it was the highest price which Japan and Korea were paying for LNG. Now Europe has to beat this price, which makes in the longer term gas far less competitive than it used to be. And I really doubt that demand destruction, gas demand destruction that we are observing right now in northwestern Europe in particular, I mean, it is 70% of the European fertilizer producers that have already stopped their operations this year. Yeah, and I'm not sure whether they will recover after this hit. So very high gas prices will challenge chemical industry, the steel makers, so all these energy intensive industries, they are under threat. Consumers who are now in a hurry installing rooftop solar or heat pumps, I don't think that they will get back to the gas demand as they did before. So basically, I think there will be a transformation, irreversible transformation of the European energy mix, and gas will definitely lose part of its positions. LNG is needed for the rescue for the next decade at least, because otherwise the balance doesn't match. But I think it will not be an easy journey. Europe will have to pay a lot for this LNG, and at the same time we see lots of complaints from the non-OECD economies like Pakistan, for example, which cannot afford to pay such a price for LNG, and Europe is actually taking this cleaner fuel from their mouth.
And not only that, Pakistan actually ran a tender for long-term supplies and nobody showed up. Nobody showed up for LNG.
It became already normal. India is complaining. So many of the countries which without gas, they have to use coal. Yeah? And then we start talking about the climate agenda. So it's really challenging. I'm afraid there is no simple and mutually acceptable solution.
But you mentioned that basically, so what can save the day, almost 90% of what you mentioned lands as a new supply into the southern part of Europe. So LNG, Caspian volumes, North African volumes, but yet we see that the southern markets, in terms of market structure, are kept hostage, so to speak, in terms of pricing determined in the northwest part of Europe, the notorious TTF index. Do you foresee, and we keep on seeing a lot of discussion in public, Greece is trying also to push for changing that benchmark. Do you think that's a realistic discussion, or it's inevitable to remain in this market structure?
I would say it's inevitable that this market structure will change, and I think it will happen already this winter, because first of all these discussions about gas price cap, which are ongoing in the European Commission, they will basically blow up the whole establishment, the whole framework of the European gas market. And then also, if you want to have gas, not just declarations, you need to secure these supplies. And the producers, they are actually not obliged to sell at a discount. They are not obliged to sell this gas specifically to Europe, not to Asia. So you need to make a value proposition that attracts them. And therefore, I think there will be new types of arrangements. The power now, the market power, unfortunately for Europe, is with the producers. And you can see, for example, Qatar dictating, Europeans, basically, that we in Qatar, we want long-term contracts. We understand that you have Green Deal. We understand that you don't want to get engaged for the purchases for the next 20 years because you want to get rid of gas. But then, sorry, there will be no gas. Either you take long-term or there is no gas.
You mentioned Green Deal, and we have 30 seconds, so I'm tempted to ask the final question. So, Green Deal, slower or faster from now on?
Faster, because otherwise the lights will not go on, and the consumers in Europe will freeze this winter. So definitely it is badly needed to speed up all the regulatory, all the permitting processes. There is huge unutilized potential in solar, in wind, in energy efficiency, enormous potential across the whole Europe. Yeah, and these are low-hanging fruits which could actually save significant volumes of energy consumption, not only gas consumption. It should be applied as fast as possible, and by the businesses as well, not only by the governments, but the large companies in their own consumption. They can develop their own generation, they can implement energy efficiency measures that will help them to significantly reduce costs, which are already going through the roof, yeah, and improve their competitiveness. So it's all about business at the end of the day, and for the companies it's very important to see all the options on improvements right now.
Yeah, each of your answers give me incentives for more questions, but I will not go on doing that. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for your insights.
Thank you.